Hello again, I'm Jason, and we're going to be talking about some more books today. Well, one book in particular. We're going to get off of the Warhammer for a while. Now that I've had my fill of Warhammer, it's just that I've moved on to some other things now. So the book I most recently finished was this one. Pride and Prejudice, gotta get that better. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Now, I've never seen the movie. The reason I got this book was back when Borders was actually a bookstore. I had gone in and I'd seen this one and the other one, Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters. And I was intrigued. I'd never actually read any of Jane Austen's books. But I had seen Sense and Sensibility. No. I'd seen Pride and Prejudice. I get them confused. There's been so many that are inspired by and, all that stuff. Anyway, so I had a general idea of the story of Pride and Prejudice. And so I was also intrigued by the cover. I mean, zombies. And it's Pride and Prejudice. So I didn't pick it up then. I was intrigued by it, but not enough to buy it. I wasn't sure that I would like it. It was one of those things where I was like, it could be. Then the movie came out. Still haven't seen the movie. But I was at a local thrift store. The book was $1.50. I thought, I can read it for $1.50. So I bought it. It was on my bookshelf for a while because I have quite a backlog of books. We used to have a bookstore here that would get in just boxes. I mean, these boxes were like 3 feet wide and like 4 feet deep, and they'd be filled with books. And for $7, you could come get a bag and just fill that bag with as many books as you could stuff in it, and it was $7. And so I got tons of books from this deal. That I'm still working through. The bookstore is gone, unfortunately. Or fortunately, as the case may be. I'm running out of bookshelf space. Anyway, I got it, put it on my bookshelf, finally picked it up, but kind of a funny story. My wife saw the cover and it creeped her out so much that she made me turn the book to basically so that she couldn't see the cover anymore. I mean, it deserves another pick, another look here. So that's the book. Anyway, first impressions. The book is ostensibly by Jane Austen, and Seth Grahame-Smith is the guy who adapted it. Basically, you're getting the story of Pride and Prejudice. So it has the Bennets, Mr. Darcy, Mr. Bingley, all of the people that are in the Pride and Prejudice novel are in this book. So if you liked Pride and Prejudice, you might like this one. I mean, it's got the zombies and all that stuff, but you still might like it. I don't know. If you like zombies, you might like this one. It's hard to tell. It's one of those things where I read it. I read through it fairly quickly. It wasn't. It's not a terribly difficult read or anything. But at the same time, I still have mixed feelings about it. It's one of those ones where it's like, do I want to read it again? Not really. Was I glad I read it the first time? Yeah, sure. It was okay. It's okay for one read, but I'm not going to keep it. It's one of the reasons why I didn't pick it up the first time. I wasn't sure if it was a keeper. If it was a keeper, I could have paid more for it, and it wouldn't have bothered me. But if it was like I paid, let's see what the price on the book, $12.95 for it new, and I just didn't like it. So $1.50. Yeah, I'm okay with that. it has kind of put me off of Jane Austen, actually. So, Jane Austen really isn't my type of book. Not an author that I've ever felt obliged or that I really ever desired to read. And after having read Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and kind of looking into the story of Pride and Prejudice to kind of see how well Pride and Prejudice and Zombies matched up with the story from Pride and Prejudice, it's kind of made me not want to actually read Pride and Prejudice. Not that Pride and Prejudice isn't a great book. I'm sure that a lot of people think it is a great book. Me personally, I could care less. And I don't know if that's... I'm perceiving... I believe that I'm perceiving the adaptation, Seth Grahame-Smith. I'm perceiving that his addition, his adaptation is the bit that's kind of feeling off to me. I think that as I read through it, it's like, yeah, this is by Jane Austen. This is Seth Grahame-Smith. And it's like, yeah, I can see the disconnect there. I can see that this part didn't come from the original. So, if you're unfamiliar with the story of Pride and Prejudice, then you will be unfamiliar with Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. So, it starts out that there's the Bennet family, and Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, the parents, have 5 daughters. Jane and Elizabeth and Lydia are the ones that I remember most because they're the most concerned. I believe there's a Mary in there, and there might be, then there's another one I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, they have money. They're fairly well to do. The problem is that Mr. Bennet can't leave his estate to his girls. Nor can he marry his girls off and then leave his estate to one of their husbands. The way that his holdings are situated is that he has another male relative. And when he dies, all of his money and land go to that male relative. And so he's concerned, maybe it's hard to tell. He's British, and so he doesn't, and male. And so he doesn't really discuss his feelings. He is concerned that about his daughters after he dies. His wife is more vocal about it. Anyway, this Mr. Bingley comes into the area, and he's like renting a mansion. And that means he's well-to-do. So the mother thinks, well, if this Mr. Bingley is a stand-up guy and he has money, we'll marry off a daughter to him, and then he can use his money to support me and my other daughters. If I can't get them married off into good situations, then after my husband dies, we can kind of sponge off of them. It's kind of anyway. So they go to a party where this guy is there, and that's when they run into Mr. Darcy, who's much too proud to he's a friend of Mr. Bingley's. He's much too proud of his station to mix and mingle with commoners, basically. And so that's where the pride comes in. And then because of some comments of his, Elizabeth, the one who would be interested in him, is prejudiced against him because of his manner, his bearing, his words. And so they both got to overcome these things and grow as people in order for them to eventually end up together. And if you're saying, well, this is a spoiler, whoa, this book has been around forever. Spoiler alert, everybody. I mean, it's been adapted into so many different things. Anyway, Mr. Bennet, Mr. Bennet has been training his daughters more to fight zombies than to get husbands. And there's this whole subplot of China being less, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for here? Basically, there's a subplot of not a conflict, but China is not seen as great as Japan. So let me bring this into better terms. So the Bennett sisters, they all went to China and trained under a Shaolin monk, a Shaolin master, in weapons and combat, so that they could destroy zombies. That was what their dad wanted. And Mr. Darcy, on the other hand, trained in Japan, as did his aunt. I forget her name off the top of my head. His aunt, who is the greatest zombie hunter in England. She trained in Japan. And so they see the training that the Bennett sisters got as somehow less than the training that they got. And that if they had come to Japan for training, they would be much better zombie slayers than they actually, than they are now, because they trained in China. China's just not as good as training in Japan. So some of the things that kind of put me off is that they're calling each other warrior all the time. It's warrior this and warrior that, and I am a warrior. And really, let's skip this warrior garbage. We understand you kill zombies, whatever, but we don't need to be reminded of it every 5 seconds. And sometimes the little bits and pieces of when the zombies pop up, they feel out of place. They feel wrong. And some of the things, there was definitely a vibe that I was getting because of this China versus Japan, that Elizabeth would end up fighting this greatest zombie hunter in England, just because there's going to be the conflict of she wants Mr. Darcy to marry her daughter, but Mr. Darcy's more interested in marrying Elizabeth, and so they eventually have a showdown, and one thing that was very different from the book as to the original book, Pride and Prejudice, as opposed to Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, is the eventual fate of the Bennett's cousin. So the Bennetts have a cousin, and this cousin is the one who's going to inherit from their father when he dies. And he ends up marrying, well, he comes down and he proposes to Elizabeth because he thinks that would be a good match, but Elizabeth turns him down, doesn't really like him. And so he ends up marrying Charlotte, Elizabeth's good friend. In the book, they're fine. They live happily ever after, whatever. Lady Catherine. Lady Catherine is Mr. Darcy's aunt. Anyway, in this rendition, I don't know why, but Charlotte ends up getting infected with the zombieism, and she still marries the cousin, and they get married and she slowly changes into a zombie. And is eventually beheaded by her husband, as is the correct procedure in killing a zombie. And then he hangs himself. I'm not sure why that was a part of the book, but it was weird. There was something else that I was going to get into, but I think I got derailed when I went off on this tangent about the cousin. Anyway, like I said, from the synopses and what I know of the Pride and Prejudice through other media, it follows pretty well that story. There are some differences and things that go into it, but all in all, it wasn't my cup of tea. I just don't care for it. It was okay. to read through. Most of the time, if I pick up a book and it's just really, really bad, or at least from my perspective, it's just terrible, I will put it down and I will not read it. I will not finish it. This one, it was good enough to read through once, but I'm never going to read it again. It just didn't. It just wasn't my kind of book. And it really turned me off to ever reading the actual novel Pride and Prejudice. So, there you go. If you have any questions about Pride and Prejudice and zombies, I'd be glad to talk about it. You can comment down below. But if you like the video, like and subscribe, and I will be bringing more of these videos as I read more books and have more time. So, thanks for watching.